Honourable Rick Barker.
Mr Speaker, I thought that was a very interesting presentation to the House by the Honourable Member Chester Borrows, a thoughtful and considered member, and I was intrigued, I must say, Mr Speaker, by his advice on how to escape jury service, to turn up in a three-piece suit and a briefcase. A three-piece, can I just say to Paul Quinn, I've never been asked to be on a jury, and to my regret, I'd like to serve on a jury, but I've never had the privilege. But Chester Borrows puts out this plan for exempting oneself from jury service, and that is that you turn up in a three-piece suit and a briefcase, and therefore you send a message to the Defence Counsel that you might take an interest in it. Well, I would say to Chester Borrows, that says more about the legal profession than what it does about the jury service. And that if they're simply going to judge people on the basis of what they wear, and they're going to see someone who's going to be, presumably, according to Chester Borrows in his analysis, wear jeans and a T-shirt, is going to be less critical of the evidence placed before them than a person in a three-piece suit and a briefcase, well, I think that says a lot about the quality of the legal profession of undertaking the defence count than it does about the jury system itself. But I do agree with Chester Borrows in that the jury system is critical to our justice system. No question about that. One of our fundamentals of our jury system is we're to be tried by our peers. And everybody thinks that is fair enough. We have the utmost respect for the judiciary, and the wisdom they bring to it. But people feel comfortable with the fact that there's 12 ordinary New Zealanders sitting there making their judgments, hearing the arguments backwards and forwards. And it is part of a civic duty, and I would say one of the things that this House should concern itself with is that this civic duty and the importance of it is somewhat being lost in our society today. People see it as more, not as a duty, but as an obligation and something to be dodged and avoided. And in part, we've brought this about by our own actions. Juries in the past have not been treated particularly well, have not been rewarded very well, and we put them in some very, very difficult circumstances. And I'll give the members but one example is historically in Greymouth, conditions for jurors were dreadful. There was no meeting room for jurors to be herded into and to wait for it. They had to stand outside. And on the West Coast it rains a lot. So traditionally jurors on the West Coast in the old courthouse used to wait across the road under Blanchfield's pie shop. Now, Blanchfield's a name that should ring a bell in this House because he was a former member for the West Coast. People would wait under the awning of Blanchfield pie shop because the southerly rain would be coming through. It was the only dry place to stand. In the teeth of the southerly, the door of the courthouse would come open and the registrar would put his head out, shriek a bunch of names into the wind, and people would flick their cigarette butts into the streaming gutters, splash their way across the road, sprint up the steps and go inside and be told either yes or no when they're out of there. But when the jury was impanelled, there was no room for them to retire to. There was no coffee-making facilities. The best that could be done is that the registrar would move some files out of a room. It could only be done on a fine day because you couldn't put the files in the car park. There was no other space. Or people would have to troop their way down to Rivington's hotel nearby through the rain to have a cup of tea and troop their way back again. This was, by any measure, Mickey Mouse, Mr Speaker. And it was only barely tolerated on the West Coast because the West Coast didn't expect Wellington to do much for them anyway. I'm pleased to say that they've got a new courthouse and that those conditions have improved somewhat. But by and large, the conditions we put our jurors into were pathetic, cramped conditions, and we didn't look after them. So that's the first thing. We've got to do much better on that. The second thing that we have failed to do is to amply or properly reward jurors for the loss of time and the service. And this is one area which I think the government needs to pay attention to. I'm sure it will say we've got a no-bid budget, we've got all these other pressures, but the fact of the matter is people do give up their time. They do it at quite a considerable amount of expense and cost to themselves, and the community should protect them from that. Now, the other thing that this bill seeks to address has been a very disturbing trend which has occurred whereby defendants have attempted to interfere with the jurors on their service and have been able to do so because, as Kiwis, we've been very open about information. and they've been able to easily access the information that jurors have, the lists and so on of the jurors and their addresses. And this has created a very disturbing trend. This bill seeks to redress that, and I agree with that part of it 100%. We need to protect the jurors, and I accept that there are some things that we can't do by way of this legislation, but we need to protect our jurors from that undue influence being exerted by an unscrupulous number. I'm not sure why this wasn't done in a previous justice bill. It could have been done on one which has already gone through the system, but in fact the fact that it's here is a good thing. So Parliament's going to pass two pieces of legislation, in my opinion, where one could have done. But if the government wants to make work for itself more difficult, well then that's its own problem. I'm pleased that this is going to be coming to the Law and Order Select Committee. The Honourable Member Paul Quinn enjoys the Law and Order Select Committee. It's a place of good debate, and we have some very interesting discussions. We have, excuse me? The committee on occasions has some who've got vision and foresight. Unfortunately, some of the bills it gets from the government and individual members lack vision and foresight, and we try and give it that when we can. Mr Speaker, the Labor will support this bill to the committee stage. We will look forward to the representations being made on it, and we will do everything we can to improve the quality of our jury system. As I've said, the jury service and the jury system is critical to our justice system. We need to protect it, but we need to go further, and this is beyond the scope of this bill, and it's beyond the scope of the Select Committee. But I would impress upon the government to take a lead in promoting jury service as a much rewarding and important part of our civic duty as citizens. The legal system with jury service can only work if good and competent people put their name forward, and good and competent people are prepared to undertake jury service. If we construct a system where we have so many loopholes that people feel the job is so onerous, they use those loopholes to escape from it, then the legal system is the poorer for that. We want to make sure that we have a jury service, a jury system that encourages and supports people in undertaking their jury service, so that we have the best of people sitting in the jury, on the jury, whenever a defendant is facing a charge, so that they are tried by their peers. I'm sure that everybody in this House, should they ever get into the unfortunate situation of being a defendant in a case, would want the finest jury that was possible. We would all expect that for ourselves, and therefore it is our responsibility to ensure that we put in place a framework, not only a legal framework, but other supports to encourage the best of New Zealanders to put their name forward and to undertake this civic duty. That we see it not as an obligation or something that we have to do because we're compelled to, that New Zealanders take up this responsibility because they want to do it as part of their civic duty in making this a much better country. That it's their contribution towards the goodness and the well-being of New Zealand. This legislation does that in part, but there are many other elements of this that need to be undertaken. Not just the housing, the accommodation for jurors when they undertake their service. It's got to also be the support services that are put in place for them, looking after their cars, helping them with babysitting, and reimbursing them against the costs of undertaking jury service. It can't be solely at the expense of the individual undertaking jury service. If they are undertaking jury service on behalf of the community, then we have an obligation to support them in carrying out that duty. Just as the community supports members of Parliament and the judiciary in carrying out their roles on behalf of the community, we should do the same for jurors as well. And I think we need a much sounder, more robust and a better system for supporting jurors in undertaking this particular duty. Thank you, Mr Chairman. Mr Speaker. Almost ran out of words there.
The Green Party will